Hi everybody, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Elisa. Today we'll do a sewing pattern tutorial. If you've been around here before, you have met this sewing pattern before. I actually created a prototype of it back in July in a destashing series, and this is the dress in question. It's a oversized, simple shirt dress with a nice button-down collar, shirt sleeves, a straight, loosely fitted bodice, and a very flowy skirt that achieves its voluminousness through godets. These godets are what make this dress a little bit more advanced. I usually like to create sewing patterns that are specifically for beginners. If you are a beginner, I'm not saying you can't do this. If you put your mind to it and you follow this tutorial step by step, you can still achieve the same result. I'm just saying that the godets are a little bit more tricky. You can make this in so many different variations and views. You can also totally forego the godets to get a more fitted, sleek, straight shirt dress, which I can imagine looking amazing in denim, for example. Another thing that could potentially be a little scary for beginners are buttons and buttonholes, which this dress requires. Generally speaking, this dress works in a lot of different fabrics. If you do go for the godets, you want to go for something a little bit more flowy and lightweight, so I would recommend any type of cotton, canvas, or linen. Any shirting material goes. If you decide to purchase this dress, you will find a pattern introduction sheet in your downloads that tells you everything you need to know about the dress, including your sizing table, how to cut all of your pieces, a piece legend so you see exactly how many pieces there are and where they're placed on your pattern PDFs. The pattern PDFs come in 3 different formats: European A4, A0, which you can bring to a printing shop if you don't want to stick your pages together, or US letter. Another thing that I'm quite excited about is the fact that this dress comes in one more size than usually. I have expanded my sizing table to extra small. So now you can find the dress in the downloads from extra small to extra large. The sizing table this time, instead of featuring my general measurements that I use to create my patterns, will feature the actual garment measurements because, as I mentioned earlier, this is an oversized design. You will need to know the exact measurements to make the best choice for yourself. And last but not least, the probably most exciting part about this video today is that I have not only made the dress for myself, I have also made another version of it in a different size for my close friend Lorraine. So at the end of this video, you will see me in my version, which is a size medium on the sizing chart, and my friend Lorraine, who is wearing a size large on the sizing chart. So get ready for some cute reveal shots. And with that, that's everything you need to know. Let's jump into the step-by-step tutorial. So this is what our back piece looks like as of right now. And we're gonna start off by inserting our darts both in the back and in the front. We do have a dart marked here in the middle of our center back piece that is placed on a fold, and you can or cannot go for the dart. That is up to you. If you add the dart, the dress will be more fitted. If you forego the dart, it will be more loose in the waist area. For my friend Lorraine today, I'm going to add the darts. As you can see, I have already cut out the paper from the darts, and that is so that it is easier for me to mark them in place. And I simply do that by placing little tips with my removable fabric pin into the 4 corners of the dart. I then remove the paper, and I then grab my pattern master and I connect the 4 dots with each other. Because this is a very busy fabric, it's a little hard to see them, but they're here. And I also need to transfer that to the other side. So I'm just grabbing my pins and I protrude the fabric at those 4 points that I've just marked so that I can see them and mark them on the other side. And I can be sure that the placement of the dart is identical towards both sides of the back. All right, now I'm ready to fold my piece. So I open it up and I fold the section where my dart is like that. And then I place a pin right here in the corner that I have just marked. And now I can go ahead and sew in my dart. And when I do, to get the most seamless finish, I will try to sew a bit of a curve here rather than just go straight down, at least towards the end of the tips, to make the finishing as flat and smooth as possible. Take this to my sewing machine. I will use a small stitch length of 2.5. And for me, because I'm a stickler and this dress is for my friend, I'm gonna be extra careful and extra thoughtful today. So I'm gonna start in the middle of the dart and sew down one side first. I don't stitch back at the end. I cut off my threads and I tie them up. And now I go to the other side. I flip my piece and I sew the other side the same way. all of my darts are sewn in, both in front and back, and now I need to move on by attaching my back yoke to the back side of my dress. This is what the yoke looks like, and the reason we have a yoke is because there is a dart hidden in the seam that connects the yoke and the rest of the back dress, and that is just so that it gives the back a little bit more shape and it's less flat and it's easier to move around in the dress, and it gives it more dimension. So what we do is we place the yoke and the rest of the back right sides touching, we align our center back notches, and then we just pin along the yoke seam. I'm now going to sew and serge the back yoke seam, and then I'm going to press it to finish it off. This is what the back looks like with the yoke sewn on, and now we can move on to inserting our godets. For that, we're going to start with our back piece. Our back piece has 1, 2, 3 godets in its main area, and then we have 2 godets in the side seam, but we'll focus on that later. I'll start off by inserting the center back godet. The godet, or the godets, are these triangular wedges. You should have 7 layers of this. As I go along, I will pick my godets from this pile over here, and I'm going to show you how to insert them now. You can see that I have cut the fabric that is in this godet section, as you can see it in the pattern. When you look at the end of the godet right up here, what happens is that from this point onwards, you can see that there is seam allowance added, and then here I've just made an incision right up to the end of the godet, so the seam allowance gets a little bit more narrow as we get to the tip here. What we will do is we grab one skirt godet, we will grab a removable fabric pen or chalk, and I will make a little dot right here that is 1 centimeter below the end of my godet and 1 centimeter in from each side. Right here, this is the end point of my godet, and I will do something similar here. I will just place a dot here, and that dot just helps me to align everything. So what I do for starters is I grab my godet and I align the right sides of the godet with the right side of the dress, as you can see. Also make sure you don't switch at the sides. If you grabbed it like this, it would be wrong. You can see that one side is a little curved, that's the hem. The 2 straight sides are your 2 godet arms. So grab one godet arm, place it right sides touching with the godet allotment in your dress. And now grab a needle, protrude your godet right here where you placed that dot earlier, and then find the dot that you've placed here in your main dress. This is your starting point. Now you can pin this one godet arm all the way down to the hem. I'll now take this to my machine and I start sewing right here at that dot. I don't start sewing up here, I don't start sewing below, I start sewing right here at that dot. Now that we have one side of the godet attached, we grab the other side of the godet allotment and move it over like this so that we can sew down the opposite side as well. Now up here I can feel a little bit of tension, and that is because I need to snip the seam allowance of the dress to get as close to the end of the seam that I've just made as possible, like this. This is a very, very delicate process. Again, now I am aligning the other side of the godet, and now there's much less tension happening. I now pin down this side of the godet, and the essential point now is that when I start sewing up here, I make sure that the seam that I now place kisses the end of the seam that I've placed previously, but it doesn't overlap. They really just should meet in a triangular fashion in a tip like this. So when I now turn everything around, what it looks like on the inside is this. The seam allowance roams completely freely, and the 2 ends of the seam kiss like I've described earlier. Now up here, if you lift this up, if you don't do this correctly, there might be a little bit of a hole here, but ideally there isn't. When I finish off the dress and I serge the seam allowances, I will eventually place some fusible interfacing, a tiny little amount, right here between the seam allowance and the shell, and iron this down to really secure it in place. This is a bit of a delicate area of the dress that could potentially tear, but if you do it correctly, you should be fine. And when we turn it around on the outside, it looks like this, pretty clean. Not really any pleats inside, especially when it's going to be pressed. And having a busy pattern obviously helps as well. But this is a pretty clean finish. Now this is the first godet done, and I need to do 6 more of these. So let me speed that up for you. the godets in their godet slots. There's just 2 left which go into the side seams, and to do that I'm going to start by grabbing one of my front sides of my dress, and I'm going to find the side seam, which is right here. I'm then going to grab one of the godets and I'm going to place it right sides touching with that front part of the dress, as I have done with all the other godets, and I'm simply aligning the end of my hem, which I'm missing a little part on this godet right here. Ideally this would continue on. I'm going to align this with the hem of my dress and I'm going to pin it down. Sloppy cutting on my part. I'm now going to sew the side of the godet attached to the front, and then I'm going to individually serge this whole side down. Alright, all the godets are in some way attached. So before we can join front and back together, we are going to also individually serge the side seam of the back, as well as this one side of the godet allotment. So what I'm going to do now is I will sew down the side seam until I reach my godet down here, and what I will try to do is kiss the pre-existing seam that attached one side of the godet to one side of the dress, and then lift my needle. I fold the seam allowance over like this, and I set it down again on the other side of that seam allowance, sewing all the way down this other side of the godet. And this way the seam allowance eventually can roam freely and we don't bog it down, because when we then press everything, it's going to be nice and flat from the outside. So that's the goal. Alright, and to complete this step of joining front and back together, we need to actually also sew our shoulders. So I'm finding those, and I make sure that everything is right sides touching, and I pin and sew and serge my shoulder seams. Alright, we have the shell of the dress assembled, all of the godets are in, front and back are sewn together, shoulders are sewn as well. And now before I do anything else, I'm actually going to attach my button tape, because that is a very easy step to do it. We need to do it before we can actually join our collar. So this is the button tape, and there is a specific way how I like to attach my button tape, especially with cotton that is printed at on one side and clearly has a wrong side to it. So I'm just grabbing one of the 2 strips of button tape, and I am focusing on one side of my center front. And what you want to do is you want to place the left side of your shell onto the right side of the button tape like this. So when you turn it around, you can see the left side for both button tape and shell. We are going to pin this down all the way from the neck hole down to the hem. I'm now gonna attach this with a big stitch length. So I'm now going to fold the button tape out like this and give it a good press. And now what we're gonna do is fold this side over by 1 centimeter, followed by bringing this edge over to the seam that first attached the button tape like this. And we want it to overlap slightly, and this should give you a nice parallel button tape. And I'm now going to grab some fusible interfacing, and I'm going to place it right in here and use that to fuse the button tape. This is going to reinforce the button tape for when we add buttons later, so they have a harder time ripping out and the thread has more to hold on to when we sew our buttonholes. There we go. That's how we press and fuse the button tape. And if you want to, you can now top stitch this side of the tape to really hold it in place. So before I do anything else, I'm going to move on to the breast pocket, because I want my friend's dress to have one breast pocket on one side. And for that, I just have this pattern piece right here, which has now 1 centimeter of seam allowance all the way around. And I'm going to take this to my iron now and fold over the pocket facing so it's clean on the inside. So this is how I have prepared the pocket now. It's really just a square, but you can see how all of the seam allowances are pressed towards the inside and the facing is actually pressed down with some fusible interfacing. And now I can place that onto my dress. What's important is that it's parallel to the front of the dress. If you're happy with the placement of your pocket, you can go ahead and sew it down in a U shape to keep it in place. Alright, Now I'm gonna move on to my collar. For the collar, we have the actual collar and the collar stand, and we do have 2 layers of each. I'm gonna separate the 2, and I'm gonna grab one of the actual collars, and I'm going to cut it back by about half a centimeter, really just 5 millimeters. I'm gonna cut away from the seam allowance. It's more like 3 millimeters, which is fine as well. Overall, it just needs to be slightly smaller than the other collar, and that is because we need one under collar and one upper collar. The smaller one is going to be the under collar. For me to be able to tell them apart, I'm going to mark an X on this one, and this is the under collar. Now I open it up and I place the upper collar right sides touching with it. And now I'm just gonna pin all the way around the perimeter. And when I get over here, we can finally see what that did. So I need to make sure that the edges of my seam allowances are flush with each other, which is going to create a little bit of tension that's going to pull the over collar under. So eventually when we turn everything around, we won't be able to see any seams. There is now a little bit of ease here, and we're gonna pin that away. Whenever you work on a piece that has some ease in it, the more pins the better. Pins are your friend in this scenario. And now I'm going to sew all the way around the perimeter here, and I'm gonna leave this section open. I'll now take this to my iron and overturn it and press it, but before I'm gonna cut back these corners here so I can get a nice finish. So this is our collar nicely pressed. And now we can use our collar stand exactly like it is here, with the curve facing upwards, because we need to sandwich the collar in between 2 collar stand layers by facing the collar stand layers right sides touching towards each other. And I'm going to start pinning everything together now, making sure that my center back notches are all aligned. And now I pin along here. It's important to know that the collar stand is straight, but the collar itself isn't. You can see that it bends up here just slightly, and you need to make sure that your seam allowance is still flush with the end of that collar seam allowance like this, so it's hidden away. I'm now going to sew from one end around the curve here all the way over to the other end and down again, making sure that over here I'm not catching my collar. Alright, so this is our collar all prepared with collar stand and all. And now we can attach it to the dress. Alright, let's attach the collar to the dress. What I do is I place the neck hole in front of me so I have easy access. So what we want eventually is that the upper collar is up and the under collar is down, but I want to work so that I start with the inner part of the collar stand facing the inside of the dress like this, and this is where I start pinning, because I want to attach the collar stand in 2 steps. The first one is to pin one layer, the inner layer of the collar stand, all the way along the neckline. And what I need to make sure is that the end of my button tape is flush with the seam that holds front and back collar stand together like this. Once that first layer of the collar stand is pinned, I'm gonna sew all the way over from one end of the button tape to the other, so from here to here. And I need to make sure that I'm not catching the second layer of the collar stand. I want to make sure that that roams freely. What I want to do now is to fold the other layer of the standing collar over and under and press it as I go along. And that is so that we can eventually top stitch this section and close it off. Alright, so let's prepare the sleeves. What I have done here is I have created some facing, or if you will, bias tape for the cuff slit that goes here. What I've done basically is I've cut a long strip of fabric that is 3 centimeters wide, and I've folded it inwards like this and pressed it down, so I have this like cocooning tape that I can use to clean up these edges of the slit. Now this is 4 times as long as this distance here. This is 12.5 times 4 because we have 2 slits, 1 on each sleeve. And I'm now just going to cut this in half, and then I should have enough bias binding to finish both slits, as you can see here. Let's put this to the side for a second. First I need to place those slits. To place the slit, I'm opening up both of my sleeves. I place them right sides touching so they are mirrored. And then I put the pattern back on, honoring seam allowance. And then I just cut into the fabric along the slit. Now we have the slit on the same side for both sleeves. And what we need to do is to cut a tiny little V into the end of it, like so. And that helps us to open up the slit this way. And now what we can do is to grab the bias binding that we have created before and pin it along the edge of the slit. Now when we go and press the slit, we want to make sure that it overlaps from the longer side of the sleeve towards the shorter side of the sleeve, like this. And I'm simply folding the upper edge like this, and then I fold it over the other way. Once the slits are in, we can close the sleeve inseam by folding both sleeves right sides touching and pinning and sewing down this side. Alright, so the sleeves are prepared. Now we can work on the cuff. The cuff has 4 identical layers. You just grab 2 each, pin and sew around the perimeter, leaving the upper side open. Alright, so the cuffs are now overturned and pressed, and we can attach them to our sleeves. Turning the sleeve right side out. So what I want to do, similar to the collar, is that I want to attach 1 layer of the cuff to the end of my sleeve first. And I want to start focusing on the slit, specifically the side of the slit that is closer to the sleeve inseam. So what I'm doing is I'm placing 1 layer of the cuff against the left side of my sleeve, and I make sure that the end of the slit bias binding is flush with the seam that holds front and back of the cuff together. I then start pinning all the way around the end of my sleeve. And ideally, if everything fits correctly, you will find that the other side of the slit also comes flush with the other side of your cuff. And if you find ease, that is perfectly alright. You can use that to create a little pleat here, as you can often see that with shirt sleeves. That is facing the direction of your inseam, like this, or you can pin it away if you rather not have a pleat here. So that's the first step done. I'm gonna attach that first layer now. Once the first layer is attached, the next step is relatively easy. You just fold the seam allowance of your right side inwards and under, like you did with the collar stand. And you can do this at your ironing table or wherever you iron. And you can go ahead and press that down. And because we're working with cotton, that will nicely keep the shape. When we go to our sewing machine, we can just top stitch that part. Alright, so now that the cuffs are on the sleeves, the last step of the pattern construction is to actually put the sleeves into the dress. And now what we need to do is pay a little bit of attention to the sides of the sleeves. We want to grab the one where the fold of the slit goes that way towards the back. And what I do is I grab the sleeve inseam and I place it onto the side seam of my dress, and then I start pinning just a little bit around the lower section of the armhole, and then I reach into the armhole and I grab the sleeve inseam and pull everything inside out. Now I focus on the shoulder area, and ideally you will have the shoulder apex in your sleeve marked with a notch, so you can place that notch against the shoulder seam in your dress. And from here we can now work around the armhole and pin everything in nicely. When you feel feel like there is ease, you can start pinning that ease in by going back and forth a couple of times. Generally speaking, this is a fitted sleeve, and if you have honored your seam allowance the same way around all of your pieces, you will find that the sleeve fits into the armhole. And because this is a rounded hole, the more pins you use, the easier it will be for you. All right, and once the sleeve is pinned in, we can take it to the sewing machine and sew it. The sleeves are in. They are also serged on the inside to look nice and clean. I've now gone ahead and serged the whole perimeter of my hem, and to finish it off, I'm simply going to fold it over probably foot width, a little bit less than 1 centimeter, and top stitch that down all the way. So at this point, it's time to place your buttons and your buttonholes. This is something that varies from machine to machine, so I thought it wasn't quite useful for me to show you how it works on my machine. If you don't know how it works on your machine, make sure to check out your instructions. I also stopped short of giving suggestions as to where to place your buttons, which obviously also dictates where to place the buttonholes. And that is because the placement of buttons is something very personal. It depends on your stature and your bust apex, so I would recommend to try on the dress, grab a couple of needles, and suss out the placement on yourself. One thing I will say is to always try a buttonhole on a test piece of fabric first, and that is just to make sure that everything works correctly before you actually create the first one on your garment. And last but not least, here's a little tip for you to open your buttonholes. I always like to place a pin on one end of the buttonhole, grab a seam ripper, insert it on the opposite end of the buttonhole, and then rip it open. And the needle will make sure that you don't cut your buttonhole open entirely and rip up your seams. The buttons are on. Everything is sewn, and the last step is to sew the belt that's gonna hold the dress together and make it look snatched and nice and more shapely. For that, there is a pattern piece in the PDF, and all you do is fold it in half and sew all the way around it, leaving one end open so you can overturn the belt, press it, and finish it off. So let me show you what my friend Lorraine and I look like in the Cleo dress.
Honestly, it's hard to be so easily attached. I look into a crowd and love whoever's looking back. Always got my heart on sale, my body's like an outlet, never mind my words. Honestly, it's hard to be so easily attached. I fall just like that. I'm too good for my own good. Yeah, yeah, I'll be there in a minute. Even though it took an hour for you to even answer. I'm losing all my power, but who's keeping score? Don't know who I am without someone by my side, and why I don't care about what they like. Honestly, it's hard to be so easily attached. I look into a crowd and love whoever's looking back. Always got my heart on sale, my body's like an outlet, never mind my words. Honestly, it's hard to be so easily attached. I fall just like that. Fall just like that.
Alright, and now we're at the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope everything was clear as we went through the steps. If you have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to leave them in the comments. The Cleo sewing pattern is available from today in my Etsy shop. You can find the link in the description. And the last thing to say for me is a big thank you to my friend Lorraine for making this so much fun, for letting me make a dress for her, and for being gracious while we took our final reveals. Twice, actually. And that's it. I hope I see you next time. Bye bye.